Has Happened to Lulu by Charles Causley, Lesson 3. In this final lesson in the series, we're going to think about point of view, and we're going to think about how our perspective and the way we see things is shaped by our identity. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and imagine the story of the poem from a different perspective. So you'll remember this image from the first lesson in the series. We had a man stranded on a desert island who sees a boat coming and thinks rescue is on the way. Boat, he says. Whereas from another point of view, we see the man stuck on the boat, who's presumably desperately thirsty and hoping for rescue, and sees land, and he thinks that salvation, that rescue is coming that way. Neither of them has all the information until they meet. They both have different perspectives, different points of view. Now that's the same for what has happened to Lulu. Obviously the poem that we have heard has been told from the perspective of the young child, the younger sibling, who doesn't fully understand all that we as readers understand. However, the core events remain the same from whichever angle you look at it. And what we're going to do today is we're going to consider what extra information, what different perspectives the different characters in this poem might have. And you're going to put together a piece of narrative writing that will describe a scene from the poem from a totally different perspective. So let's have a look and see how that might look. Which of the characters, either in the poem or linked to the poem on the outside of the story of that poem, might this be? Have a listen and try and work out whose perspective we might be seeing this event from. When the light in her attic bedroom is switched on, the window above throws a pinkish warm glow onto the darkened street below. I wait quietly, the engine purring softly. Tonight is the night. Okay, so who do we think this might be? Now everybody reads this poem differently. In my head, I've always imagined that Lulu escaped with a boyfriend on a bike. There may be other explanations. We have to make all sorts of inferences. We have to read our own story into this poem. But I imagined that this is how he might look. So I have begun here a narrative that might be from the point of view of a boyfriend coming to meet Lulu in the middle of the night for a nighttime flit. Looking at the same story in the poem from a different perspective, I've chosen another scene and tried to express it through a different perspective. See if you can work out whose perspective this is. I traced my finger around the edge of the empty shape in the dust, remembering the tin box in which she had squirreled away every birthday or pocket money pound. How much was in there I had no idea. My leaden heart hung heavy in my chest. So who might be doing that? I've chosen key symbols from this poem and have focused on that, but focused on it from a different perspective. Who might be there? Is this the voice of the child, or is it the voice of somebody else? Although the poem doesn't actually describe the mother coming in and seeing the empty circle on the dusty shelf where the money box used to be, it's an image that we recognise from the poem. And what I've done is I've imagined the mother looking at it from a different moment, which is the sort of thing that I want you to do when you write your narrative. Now we're going to do two things before you decide from whose point of view you're going to write your narrative scene. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and remind ourselves of some of the strong emotions that the people involved in this story of the poem may be feeling. So if you are the child, the younger sibling, perhaps you're feeling confusion, apprehension, a sense of loss. If you're the mother, you might be feeling a sense of love or of loss, or the father, the same thing, but also pain, betrayal, perhaps anger. If you are Lulu, who has escaped, perhaps you're feeling apprehension, a little bit of worry, relief to have made it away from a repressive place that you didn't like, or excitement. So just remind yourself about some of those emotions, and you wrote quite a lot of details about those in lesson 1. And now I'm going to ask you to pause this video and to listen to a song which always for me links very closely to this poem. It's a song by a band called the Beatles, who your parents and grandparents probably know about. And they wrote a lot of music at a time when teenagers were rewriting the rules of the world around them. And this is a story about somebody doing just what Lulu did. And it's actually based on a true story. So I will have put a link onto the Google Classroom to a YouTube site so you can have a listen to the song. But it's a song by the Beatles and it's called She's Leaving Home. If you listen to the song, one of the things you would have realised is that it tells the same story from a number of different perspectives. It does leap about in terms of the time, but the first perspective is the young woman quietly leaving her home while everyone else sleeps. It's rather similar to what has happened to Lulu, although of course there is much more drama in the poem, isn't there? The second perspective is the mother, and it's a really moving image, that scene when we see her standing on the stairs and she calls to her husband. She's just seen the note and understood what has happened, and perhaps at that moment also understood really for the first time what her daughter was feeling. The third one is at the end, and it's the young woman who's a long way away. She's escaped and she's having fun. It's quite a moving song, but for me it has lots of links to what has happened to Lulu. There's only one task for this lesson, but it's in two stages. So the task is to write a narrative description which describes a scene from the poem from the perspective of someone different. We've seen the poem from the perspective of a younger brother or sister. Now I want you to write a narrative description, not a poem, but a piece of narrative from a different perspective. So step one is to plan. I want you to select a perspective from the list, or you can choose one of your own. So you could perhaps tell a moment in time, describe a scene linked to this story from the perspective of Lulu herself. We don't hear from her at all in the poem, do we? From the mother, from the father, perhaps from a boyfriend or girlfriend, perhaps from a best friend at school or a teacher at school, or perhaps a neighbour. You might have another idea about somebody else who has been affected in some way or has witnessed this story in some way, and you can write a scene, a moment, a snapshot in time from their perspective. As part of your planning, I want you then, having chosen that, to write notes on the emotions that they might be feeling, so you get a sense of the mood for your description, the setting that they're in. Where would we picture them? So a teacher at school perhaps is sitting at a wooden desk marking Lulu's exercise book and perhaps feeling a sense of regret when she's heard something about what has happened. So think about that, think about what they're doing. And then finally, I would like everybody to try and select a symbol from the poem, we looked at that last lesson, that you can include in your narrative description. So for instance, you might include the old rag doll, which symbolises a rejection of childhood and a moving on. You might choose the engine roar, which symbolises excitement, perhaps if you're Lulu or the boyfriend, or perhaps it signifies fear, terror, danger from the perspective of the mother or father. You might choose the open window, all sorts of things like that. So see if you can choose a symbol from the poem that you might include in your snapshot narrative description. And finally, the writing task. This is where I want you to use your planning ideas and your notes to write this snapshot, a moment of time that is linked to this story of Lulu and her nighttime flit. I want you to aim to write between 300 to 500 words, no more than that. So between half and a full A4 side maximum. Focus on just one scene from the poem, not the whole story. Okay, so it's, as I said, it's a snapshot. Use the senses to describe this moment from a clear point of view. So I want to know about the smells, the textures, the sounds. You don't have to write about all 5 senses, but use that description, the senses, to create a sensory description that will make us feel like we're absolutely there. And of course, finally, use ambitious language and sentence structures and accurate punctuation if you can. Hand in your work to your teacher and they will give you some feedback.